Hi, everyone. Thank you. We're going to do a quick intro here of our panelists. And I also want to say a thank you to Kayla, who is here from GoMath behind the scenes, doing really important work for us as well. And always a thank you to Patricia for making everything run so smoothly. So our panel today is really exciting because we get to tell you about best practices, and we get to show you some joy in this moment, and we are in desperate need. At least I'm in desperate need of joy. So hopefully today's session will really spark you and give you some of that joy in this Creating the University We Want session. Our moderator for this session is Professor Kima Cargill, who is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Planning and a Professor of Psychology at the University of Washington-Tacoma. Our panelists are Christine Noyes, who is an amazing data analyst from the Graduate School's CAIR team. And we have graduate students, GoMath graduate students, Ariana Gómez, who is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology, and Lamar Foster, who is a PhD student in Educational Policy, Organizations, and Leadership in the College of Education. So we're trying to have a little Twitter record of this as well. So if we could have the panelists please pop your Twitter handles into the chat so that anyone could please make sure that you're tagging them, where we are tweeting at hashtag grad justice, and then you can make sure that you are getting our folks here. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Associate Dean Kima Cargill. And you all, if you choose the speaker view, you'll be able to see the pinned speakers for the session today.
Thank you, Relina. I feel like I should mime getting the mic to try to make it feel more 3D and real. It's an honor to be here, to be part of this summit. Well, every day it's an honor to be to work at the graduate school and to be part of this work on equity and justice. So today what we're going to do, we really want to showcase the voices of Ariana and Lamar. We do want to frame that with some data evidence from the graduate school about admissions and retention. So we'll start with 10 minutes from Christine Noyes with that evidence, and then we'll kind of pivot to Ariana and Lamar for their voices and experiences, and then we'll be able to circle back if people want to in the Q&A to the data and also to more on GoMath and the OG program. So I will now hand the microphone to Christine.
Thank you, Kima. Some of you on this call, many of you know me. I recognize several names from my work in the graduate school over the last several years. Many of you know me under my grad program auspices and training and supporting you in use of the university systems. But an additional part of CAIR's responsibilities for the university is the institutional analysis and reporting aspects of graduate student data. So it's in that hat that I get to talk to you about some really interesting numbers we saw in autumn 2020. So think back to September. That feels like more than a year ago, but it was really only 8 months ago. But I want you guys to think back even further than that. So the numbers we're going to talk about today are the numbers that you developed through the admissions processes in January of 2020, when we were that's when we get the peak of our applications for graduate programs, when you guys start developing and making your decisions on who gets admitted. And the thing we saw from those efforts you were doing way back in January and February of 2020, as we came into fall quarter, we noticed that our URM enrollment changed 15% in a single year. Typically, we get a 7% year increase in our URM enrollments over the last 10 years. So this 1 year of 15% made me go to Raylina and go, well, I have some good news for you. Our numbers look really great. How the heck did we do this? And that became our next question, is how did we achieve this? What's been happening for all of us as we've been thinking about holistic admissions, changing some recruitment practices at the university? How are we getting these numbers? So in looking at that, I said, well, how about we go out to our top schools? So I looked at our schools, and 9 schools had significant growth in URM, from a 400% increase to a 23% increase in this last year. I want to highlight, and we'll get into this, the 400% increase is due to a dramatic change that that program chose to do. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I reached out to 53 advisors of the university and asked you guys to let me know through a survey what you did in 5 key areas of admissions, hoping to solve the problem of how do we replicate the success, right? When we have successes, we want to understand what contributed to that success and what we could do moving forward to keep that momentum going. So the other thing I did was go out and look nationally at what some of the most recent research articles said about what programs, discipline areas were doing in terms of holistic admissions, and thinking back on some things. And I saw 3 main things come out from looking at other universities' processes. They moved from focusing on experiences to focusing on competencies. So instead of looking, did the student have X number of volunteer hours, maybe a student would have volunteer hour or work experience, recognizing that not all students have the ability to take volunteer experiences on if they're having to fund their own education. Also aligning the evaluation process to the mission, vision, and values of the program or of the university. So really tying and making sure that when questions were being asked of applicants, those questions directly related to things that the mission, vision, and values of the specific program wanted to bring out. And then realigning weighting of admissions criteria. We've talked a lot about this in holistic admissions workshops, of moving away from test score, GPA as a heavily weighted criteria to looking at other aspects of the person. So as I looked at what our departments did, 22 of you responded, and that represented about 20% of all applications, programs possible to apply to for the university. And I saw some themes. I broke this up into 5 areas in analyzing what you're doing. Marketing and website. So what are we doing in our recruitment aspects before we've even started talking to an individual person? Prospective student outreach, maybe where we're starting to engage on an individual basis with a potential student. The application's design itself, what you've chosen to do there. Your application review process and post-offer follow-up, thinking that by the time we hit enrollment, somebody has interacted with our website, maybe even talked to faculty as they made the choice of accepting our offer of admission over another school. I found some key things that several of you mentioned. I should mention that as the 22 respondents told me and indicated where they'd made changes, every one of them, well, 21 of the 22 people indicated at least 3 of these areas was a place that they made change. So as we're thinking about holistic admission, developing cohorts we want to see, thinking also holistically about the whole process a student works through as they enter the university, or be considered to enter the university, I should say, was something I found really interesting coming out of what you all have been doing. Removal of gendered language was a key in there, adding social media campaigns and focused on student stories and social contribution research. So really tying even in disciplines that we don't necessarily think of as socially conscious discipline, maybe in our mindsets, even seeing them tying to how they're contributing to community. I'll just take a minute and you guys can kind of review some of these yourselves. Really increasing frequency of information sessions and adding online options and pre-recorded sessions also came out by Motel. I'll just highlight a couple things. While some departments highlighted that removal or making GREs optional was something they did, when Darcy, our other institutional analyst on my team, and I have actually looked at our GRE data, we cannot find a direct tie between diversity number increases in programs and the GRE being removed. There's, to such an extent, we can't even really say that there's a correlation between diversity increases and removing the GRE. I found that to actually be kind of interesting overall, that we're just not seeing that, but we only have 2 years of data to really track against for removal, and we will be adding this year in and re-looking at those numbers again. And then really advocating, many of you chose to incorporate an implicit bias training, as well as a rubric redesign and training program on the rubric for everyone sitting on your admissions committee, and doing those trainings every year. So not just a one-time, the first time you serve of a 2 or 3 year commitment to do admissions review, but doing it every year for every person. And then finally, some programs talked about really thinking about the onboarding process as something that's happening throughout the summer. So today is one of those days, is a key day in graduate admissions. Many of you put today as when to accept an offer of admission. You know, students need to make a choice in whether or not they're coming, but starting to think about what those communications are from today clear till September 29th, when we start school. I think that's the first day of school this year. I looked also at your program materials and kind of where some broad buckets sat in the 91 programs. We're looking at academic attributes, resume, essay, and recommendation letter, and I'd be happy to forward that to you if you're interested in what those findings were, but they're a little bit less interesting to me than some of the quotes from all of you in what you did in this space. And I wanted to highlight a specific question. These are actually the essay question examples that exist in some of our programs' work. And one that I thought was really interesting in diversity and inclusion, tying their diversity and inclusivity questions to what it means in the profession and discipline to have an inclusive lens in the work, and even using anti-racism. This is one of the few prompts that actually used anti-racism in their prompt. So I really wanted to highlight that one in the middle for each of you. And I have many, many other quotes. Raylina is dripping in quotes that I found out of this work that I'm sure we'll share with you in other sessions throughout the year. So looking forward into what we can do in increasing and continuing this momentum we saw this last year is looking at our full admissions pipeline, marketing to pre-registering for courses, that whole space we're in, being transparent. So this ties back to that mission, vision, values, really training that don't hide what you're looking for. We can kind of see some admissions questions where maybe we're skirting around a diversity question instead of just asking applicants, how do you see this profession? How do you see this work that you're about to do in graduate school contributing or needing to address issues in a space? And then drawing connections to our missions that include a diversification efforts. So it's really saying that making sure when we're talking about the mission of a program and what we're trying to do, that that has a mission that talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion in that mission statement overall. It's not a side thing we do. It's integrated into the full body of work for the discipline. And then really talking about adding non-cognitive skill evaluation along with elicitation. So encouraging students to talk about the skills that aren't academic, they're social skill, communication skills. Trying to think of another example I saw come out where we're really asking students about things that maybe we don't, even let's take a mathematics applicant, talking to them about communication as part of their application and how they see communication skills as part of what they need in their discipline. So just some of the things I found. I'm excited to hear from Lamar and Ariana in their work as well today.
Thank you, Christine. These slides have so much specificity, and there are already some questions coming in the chat that we will get to at the end. Let me next go to Lamar first. And Lamar, maybe you can first describe what is the OG Outreaching Grads program to anyone who doesn't know, and what attracted you to it.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you for allowing me to be on part of this discussion, and thank you all for joining us wherever you're zooming in from. So an OG Outreaching Grad is obviously a play on words if you know anything about history or anything of that sort. But anyway, it basically is about how do we make a more welcoming environment for marginalized and minoritized students specifically. And so what that looks like is providing one-on-one student engagement. It looks like connecting with undergraduate registered student organizations, participating in panels such as this one, but particularly when there's prospective student days, helping students understand what the culture, what the climate at UW is for students who are coming from marginalized backgrounds or Black and Brown, Latinx, Indigenous students, knowing that that there are differences in how people experience or feel safe or comforted on a campus, particularly at a campus where predominantly the majority of the students are white. And then it's also Outreaching Grads, OGs, liaise between all three campuses. And so I was fortunate enough to meet students at the University of Tacoma and help them in their matriculation to that campus, and how and just letting them know that they're not alone. I think that's the big part of the OG is letting people know that they're not alone. They don't need to suffer in silence, or that and that there's a community out here. So that's in it in a nutshell.
Thank you. And Ariana, how about you? What drew you? Why did you want to become an OG? And are there any details you might add of the role of an OG that Lamar did?
Sure. I think Lamar did a great job of explaining what the OG program is. I think there's nothing more that I can add besides that. Apart from going out into the community and going out to convince people to come to UW, we as OGs also create a community within ourselves. Like I've worked with Lamar on several OG events, and so like now we know each other, and so when we see each other, it's like a family. We're no longer strangers. Yeah, exactly. We're no longer strangers. We're no longer like, oh, I know of them, but never talked to them. So and because of the panels, because a lot of the panels are based on topics of, you know, identity, we learn a lot about each other across the different panels. And again, that creates family with each other, because now we understand each other a lot more. We understand, you know, the people, not just the program itself. And so what drew me to the OG program was finding that community and finding the opportunities to talk about my experience at the University of Washington. So like Lamar said, this is a predominantly white institution. So it's not the same if you talk to someone else who doesn't face microaggressions from a day-to-day basis, or who doesn't feel biased towards it within, you know, the school or within their department or within their program. And so being one of the few individuals from a marginalized community in my department, it was hard to find kind of that that feeling of belonging, because, you know, even though my department does a great job of student support, there's not a lot of us who can support each other at a more cultural basis. And so that's why being part of the OG program, I found people from all over the country who have different experiences, but, you know, we share with each other, and we embrace that. We don't look at each other and say, oh, why did you do that? Or, oh, I grew up like this, and someone looks at you funny. It's like, oh yeah, okay. Like that's part of you, and that's beautiful.
Well, it's interesting. One thing I hear both of you saying, you know, like if you read about the OG program on the GoMap website, it looks primarily like a kind of a service group or organization that's meant to be outreach and education and recruitment. But it sounds like it functions equally for your own success and comfort and sense of community, and even retention in terms of your own graduate experience. It seems like you both touched on that. And I don't know if, Lamar, if you have anything to add in terms of some of Ariana's comments about that sense of family and community.
Yeah, for sure. I could give an example. So I came to Washington from Pittsburgh, uh, and Pittsburgh is a pretty diverse place. I didn't feel too isolated there. I would go on public transportation all the time, didn't have any issues. And one of the things Ariana mentioned was about like microaggressions, right? And one of the ways I was being microaggressed quite often was when I would ride the bus, right? Like because I lived relatively far away from campus, I would take the bus, and I would be on the bus for about 45 minutes, and it'll be like a packed bus, like it's a commuter bus. And one of the things I noticed is that I would get on the bus, sit down, and it'll be a packed bus. Nobody would sit next to me. And, you know, initially I was like, oh, great. Nobody, you know, I had the seat by myself. That's a great thing. You know, I have some space. But then after a while, I started realizing like, what's going on with me? You start to internalize those things. And then I remember one time I was getting on the bus, and Ariana was on the bus, and I was like, "Oh, hey!" You know, it was just, and it just kind of, and like she said, like I would have never. We're in totally different programs, different departments, everything. I wouldn't have known her if it wasn't for GoMap. It wasn't for the OG program. And so something as mundane as getting on the bus was something where it's like, okay, let me see. Like and also it became a game to me too. I would like sit at the window, I would sit at the aisle, I would put something at the seat, you know, so there was always these different things that I would do to see like how people would avoid not sitting with me, right? But then when I saw Ariana on the bus, I was like, oh, this is great. And that whole thing of like, you know, being microaggressive, people not seeing, I didn't even think about it, right? Because, you know, I consider her a friend. I consider her, you know, a colleague as well. And it just made me feel more at peace, right? It like the whole getting on the bus and then getting off the bus and and then telling my friend, my family, be like, okay, this is the tactic I used today, you know, as far as getting on the bus. I didn't have that conversation, you know, anymore because Ariana was there. And once again, it was because of this community of the OGs. And then also another example is when there was a person at the University of Tacoma, I think it was Dr. Jackson asked me to reach out to, and he was having a really hard time in his program. He was in like a data analytics program, and we ended up talking, and we actually became really good friends, and still to this day, like I do quite a bit of data analytics stuff as well, and now we just kind of talk about just different things in terms of data analytics, like, and he's now since graduated, and once again, that's a friendship, that's a part of my social capital, I guess, that I would have never had because of the OG. And like I said, it goes beyond just being a colleague, but also just being part of a community and a family.
That the bus story is really poetic. And I admire how you were applying your research methodology skills and trying to see what variables influenced who would sit next to you as very graduate student of you. So I think people might want to hear more about some of the specifics of the activities and information that you share out in your work. And I know that would differ a little bit depending on whether it's with departments like faculty or GPAs or GPCs versus prospective students. So Ariana, let me start with you, because I think people want to know more kind of what you're doing on the ground as an OG.
Sure, I can talk about pre-pandemic as well as during the pandemic, because we're still going as OGs. As you all know, the recruitment doesn't stop. We still want students to come, and I think, yeah, so actual events, it's often going to recruitment events. So during interview season, we're really busy. We go to, sorry, I'm saying Michelle's comment. We'll go to like recruitment breakfasts that are specifically for individuals from marginalized groups to come and talk and have kind of a private space and a closed space to be able to ask questions that are important to them. We'll go to panels. I know I've been on the panel for the physics department several times, and those are more broad discussions of resources on campus, and I'm there to kind of discuss specifically GoMap. I know we do outreach with college students who come and visit back pre-pandemic. And I remember one specifically was Dr. Jackson asked us to bring an item from our research that was important to us, and to kind of just have that on the table, and students would go around and ask all of us like, oh, what do you do? And also like, what is this? And so I think I had, I do a lot of cell biology, so I used a tissue culture flask, and someone else, my friend Erica, had headphones because she does a lot of audio work based on whales in the Bering Strait. And I think someone else had like a propeller for some sort of engineering project. So it was also just us asking each other, being like, oh, what do you do? Like, we kind of know each other, but it's like, oh, this is the scientific and professional aspect of it. And I've also, from the OG program and GoMap itself has thesis writing groups. And I've grown 2 thesis writing groups out of that, where I can go, depending on the day, you know, just having, even though it's Zoom, we did it in person before, but even though it's just Zoom, like, we're there, we're focused, we're all struggling, but we're getting through it together. And we take breaks and we talk about things, kind of like with Lamar, the bus story with Lamar, we'll be like, oh, this happened to me today. I totally forgot about the bus story. Yeah, but when you were saying, I was like, oh my God, that's right. And it was so great to see someone I knew, because yeah, I've experienced similar situations to Lamar, not to the extent he has, but yeah, I've definitely noticed where people will kind of skirt around me and not want to sit next to me. But during the pandemic, I think within the first week of the UW shutting down, Dr. Jackson asked for me to be on a kind of like a Zoom room, and like people could come in and out. So that was a little different than in person, where you're kind of mingling, you know, there's sometimes food, there's sometimes beverages, and you're like, it was different to kind of, and I think we've all experienced that, like that change of not being able to see all of the body language that someone has. And so But it's been interesting during this past year of recruitment that I did notice in some of the way departments recruited, the spaces were a lot safer for students to ask questions. Like I think we used GatherTown. I was representing GOMAP for recruitment in GatherTown. And so I was representing GOMAP, and so people would come in and be like, oh, like they started with like basic questions like, oh, what is GOMAP? What is an OG? And then they started really getting in and be like, but what is it really like in Seattle? And so while we could do that in person, you know, people could hear you. If you're like in a big poster hall, people could still hear you, but in GatherTown, no, only the people in that space could hear you. And you know, some faculty would kind of skirt around and they'd like hear little bits, but we could see who was coming in and out of the space and also see each other. And so I got very like intense questions, and I was also feeling safe, to be honest, even though, you know, I understand that when I go to other departments, there's likely less repercussions for me if I were to say something about, you know, what it might be really like as a person of color or a woman of color in Seattle. But like, you know, I still want to be honest. I don't want to bait people to come here and then be like, haha, surprise, like, you know, I knew this could happen to you and I didn't tell you. I want to be honest with them. So I think some of those spaces were actually much safer this year, and I felt much more open to sharing and being able to, I don't know, just, you know, I'm always honest with the students, but sometimes, you know, there's colleagues around and I have to be very careful, or there's faculty around, and, you know, depending on what my next steps are, it's like I might be working with those faculty. So really, the spaces during the virtual spaces were actually much more comfortable in some ways than in the in-person. But you know, with the virtual aspect, we've like GOMAP has also been able to reach out beyond the UW space. I think we did one with the Cal State system. We did a panel for some of their undergraduates and telling them what it's like to be at UW. I think I worked with Michelle on that one. So it was like, again, like we all know each other because of these things, and we learn a lot about each other through these panels. And then, you know, sometimes ideas come about, sometimes research ideas or outreach ideas come from these things. And I've heard some amazing things, and I'm able to connect people with other people I know in GOMAP, or they connect me with people they know in GOMAP or from other parts of their department. It doesn't have to be GOMAP, but we have this very intricate network. And it's always so beautiful to me to like, oh, I think I know that person, but I don't know that person. And they're like, come on, let's like, I'll introduce you. And that is a much more, like to me, that's a much more meaningful connection than sometimes like, oh, my advisors, sometimes like, oh yeah, I kind of know that person, but like, I don't know if it's a good idea for me to introduce you. Like everyone in GOMAP was always like, yeah, let me introduce you. They're, you know, we worked on this, or I know them because of this, but here you go. Like, this is my network. This is your network now too.
I'm just curious, this sort of discovery that you made with GatherTown, are you all having discussions about how you can sort of capture that when in a post-pandemic reality with prospective students?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think it's also with the times, like people are more willing to ask those questions now. And I'm honestly very proud that incoming students are asking the questions, because a few years ago, that was definitely, you know, I was always like, come on, ask me, like, I can tell you what it's really like, or I can tell you, you know, some of the things I've experienced. And they're like, oh no, it'll be okay. But I noticed, especially this year, but in the last couple of years, students are very much wanting to know the reality. And I've heard that from some of the GPAs and GPCs in their own panels of diversity and equity, that they were getting hard-hitting questions from not only students from marginalized backgrounds, but from students who come from white backgrounds. And so I was like, okay, it's not just, you know, within the marginalized community, it's everyone wanting to know that the university and departments are making moves. Not people are no longer complicit, which is so exciting to me to know there's a cluster of graduate students who are coming in that really want to see change. And as graduate students, I think we are very powerful, and we have a lot of say in what the university does, because we do drive a lot of the, you know, boots on the ground research. A lot of the, like, even though our advisors' names are on the papers, we're the ones actually doing the work.
Yeah, and I think we're in a moment in time, which I'm hoping it doesn't just stay a moment, where people are becoming more sensitive to issues of race, issues of equity. And we saw a proliferation of institutions and companies putting out equity statements, you know, standing up for Black Lives Matter. And so now it's kind of this, it's this game to try to figure out who is doing this because it's in the moment and who is doing this because they're committed to this and they have a history of being committed to racial equity. And I think maybe that's possibly why there's an increase in people asking those hard questions, as well as they're in these virtual spaces where it's just one-on-one with students and people that they can see as their peers. And I think I've been part of a few panels and reached out to and been asked to reach out to graduate students, prospective graduate students, and they've been very upfront about asking about if UW is really about racial equity, and also wanting to know clearly about the shortcomings. And one of the things I appreciate with GoMap and being an OG, it's, this is service, this is volunteer. We're not like, even though yes, we represent UW, we're not like beholden to say all the nice things and be like, only don't say any of the negative things. And we've been supported in that way, right? And I think graduate students, prospective graduate students, gravitate towards that authenticity, to where we can say that, hey, this has been our experience. We've seen these great things happen. We've seen these shortcomings, and it gives them a fuller picture. So because I don't want to be complicit in a gotcha moment where we get the students here and then they're just going through fire. And it's like, oh, well, well, we got you here, right? Because it's not so much about recruiting them, but it's also keeping them here, right? And so with the OG program, we're also attending other events that are throughout the year where current students are joining us. And so so I think a lot of students are appreciating the authenticity. They're seeing that, like, UW is not saying that we've arrived, in any sense of the word, but we have done these things in the past, and these are the things we're continue doing. Those are the things I try to articulate to incoming graduate students.
That's wonderful, and I can't agree more with trying to shift some of the focus away from just recruitment, and then, as you say, kind of throwing people in a fire or a gotcha moment. I know I want to switch to Q&A soon. I did have one more question that came to my mind, since I'm actually faculty on Tacoma, so I'm often thinking about Bothell and Tacoma and how the experiences for students are different there. And it's often a little bit different graduate student demographic in terms of fewer doctoral students and often more place-bound students or regional students. So I'm curious sort of how your work as OGs might have varied. Lamar, you mentioned the one relationship on the Tacoma campus. And I don't know if you have done much more on Bothell or Tacoma, or if you could speak to sort of how the tri-campus part of it works, because that's a little bit, I think, tricky with the difference in students and programs. Lamar, you first, if you have more on either of the other campuses.
Yeah, that's a great question. And like I said, I made the connection with a student at Tacoma, and I think that's one thing I've seen this year, and I think maybe for the past 2.5 years, that's been a big push with GoMap of really connecting all of the campuses and making it known that, like, GoMap is not just a Seattle campus thing. Like, it's for everyone within the UW system. And so I was fortunate and thankful to be able to connect with a student at UW-Tacoma. I haven't had any experience connecting with students at UW-Bothell, but I know that it kind of makes it more cohesive, because there's also, to be honest, there's a little bit of like an elitism for people who are at the Seattle campus, and and I've heard that from people at at UW-Tacoma, I remember there was a student during prospective student days. I think he was coming in for his PhD and he got his master's at UW-Tacoma, and he kind of made this snide comment of like, yes, we have a campus, making it clear that it exists. It's not just an idea, right? And so being able to connect with UW-Tacoma students and also UW-Bothell students, like having those goals and that initiative lets it become more of a one unit, I guess. And so for me, it was just my situation with connecting with a UW-Tacoma student. It was, I think, this individual reached out to Carolyn, or I think he saw something around graduate resources or students of color support, and reached out to GoMap in that way. And then Dr. Jackson reached out to me, and then I connected with him, and there was actually another student as well who reached out to him, and I think he was like on the advisory board, the graduate student advisory board, but yeah, and so we just connected, and it was a thing where he was just feeling isolated. He wasn't getting support, and I always call it like the N of one, phenomenon, right? Where it's like, for me, like I'm always like the N of one when it comes to being a Black student in my classes, or being a man of color, or just a person of color in my classroom, in my classes. And so he was feeling that and just misunderstood. And so we were able to talk through like just our experiences, right? Just how we deal with things, and just letting him know that he's not alone in this. And so having a sense of solidarity, and then also like just being real. And so that connects outside of just this formal role of being an OG, right? And so when he graduated, like he like put a post on LinkedIn, and he tagged me saying like, oh, like Lamar and Will helped me through my grad. And I was just thinking like, oh, I was just being a friend, I wasn't even necessarily thinking of it in terms of being an OG. I was just thinking about like, this is what I would want, right? Because I went through my master's program at a predominantly white institution and didn't have that support at the graduate level, right? And so I think that's what makes this unique as well, because at my other institution where I did my master's, these types of supports were only for undergrads. And so like, I'm only connecting with undergraduates, people 18, 19 years old. I'm 20, 24, 25 years old. And I'm like, but this guy is a lot older, and, and I'm around his same age. And so we can connect on different levels as well, in terms of interacting on campus and also interacting outside of campus.
That's great. Ariana, have your experiences as an OG extended to Bothell or Tacoma, or have you had observations about?
I haven't had too much experience going to the campuses besides, just on my own and passing them. But I think this year during the OG training sessions, I did meet a couple of students from the Tacoma campus. And so even though it was virtual, it was still nice. And again, kind of some of the plus sides of being virtual is that, Dr. Jackson didn't have to, and I didn't have to drive down to Tacoma. We could easily say, hey, whatever works in our schedules, we can talk to you, and we can talk about being an OG and what that means. And I think that was one of my first interactions. I think in past years, we have interacted with some of the Tacoma students. And I know Dr. Jackson was going to Bothell for several OG events. And I think it was Real Talk Tuesday style sessions there. And so I know we were invited a few times to tag along if we wanted to, but it was just a matter of, time and actually commuting there. But, it would be nice to have those connections a lot more, and to also bring them into our spaces and say, there's a bigger community of UW that we belong to. It doesn't matter if you're doing your master's at night, or if you're doing your PhD, or if you're doing any sort of studies, but it's hard to be in Seattle as an individual from a marginalized background. So we're here for you no matter what.
Yeah, I think your point about, of all the complaints we've been doing about Zoom and the virtual environment, I have definitely been hearing that as far as Bothell and Tacoma go, it really allows for a lot more inclusivity. And so I think there's a lesson there in terms of our programming, our meetings, all kinds of things for the post-pandemic reality. Maybe we'll start the Q&A. I want to see if Dr. Jackson has anything else to add about the tri-campus piece of OG while we're on that, and then we might just open it up very.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, everybody. As Michelle just added in the chat there, she's also an OG, and she had helped with a lot of things that were happening at the UW-Bothell campus. And it was a Real Talk Tuesday kind of style event that we had in person at the UW-Bothell campus. And then it was interesting between the two campuses for Bothell and for Tacoma, they had, in terms of talking to the graduate students there, they had different needs or desires. And so when I tried to target those voices and ask, Tacoma was interested in more of a building community kind of event in the local areas of their campus. And so we sent out a lot of messaging there, and some of the OGs came down to Tacoma to meet with some of the, and actually a Seattle person who wasn't an OG, just was looking for community, came all the way down to Tacoma for that event. And then also for the Real Talk Tuesdays, that was something that we were able to keep going with different topics and that were unique to Bothell and also unique to the evening classes. And so we were very cognizant about the time, as well as the UW-Tacoma students who had weekend classes and things like that. So we had key contact people that we were working with there. And then another issue, if you will, around the UW-Bothell and Tacoma campuses is they have master's students. So the OGs, when I caught them, they were either already in their first year and had one more year to go. And I was like, can you find someone else that would be interested? You know, we were trying to build that community so that we could keep going and not having to start over. And then also for Tacoma, they have the EDD program. So I was visiting them in person, those wonderful graduate students there. So it's just like a lot of different dynamics. So I felt it was really important not to replicate what exactly Seattle's doing, but to try to get that information from the actual students and participants themselves. And in an odd way, it's been a lot harder in the virtual space. I mean, students still come to the events, but in terms of that other component, there's just a little bit of a disconnect with the virtual space and not being able to build the community events in person. So yeah, I don't think I missed anything there, or maybe I did. I'm sorry. I was just looking at the chat too. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to move to Q&A. Patricia, are you going to help with that? I haven't been able to mind the chat.
Yes, I am keeping an eye on the chat, and I think what I've seen mostly from folks so far are some comments. I will double check I didn't miss anything, but do feel free, folks, to either use the chat for questions or raise a hand.
Kima, just really quickly while people are thinking of questions, I think one of the things I heard Lamar and Ariana really highlighting for us is that importance of continuing to support the student once they're here and give community, and how much that speaks to our prospective students as well when that community exists. And looking, Kima gets a monthly report from me on where we're projected at coming into the fall for our incoming cohort. Our incoming cohort for 2021 is looking very much to have a diversity increase similar to our autumn 2020 cohort. So when I think about a 2-year growth of significant growth in who our students look like, particularly students of color, it means that who we're supporting the next several years in our master's programs look different than we've maybe thought of our cohorts looking in the past, and even more kind of maybe issues of supporting our BIPOC students will be coming up because there will be more on campus to support across all 3 campuses. So just something for us as advising staff and a support staff for these students to be thinking about and encouraging as we talk to the faculty and to our own programs about how we're supporting our students.
So any questions for Lamar, for Ariana, Christine? Heather, I see your hand.
Hi, I'll turn my camera on here so you can see me. Hi, I'm Heather Workle. I'm a GPA in communication. And my question is around our largest graduate program in our department is a fee-based program. And so one of the biggest struggles we've faced is, especially with a lot of the GOMAP funding options are not available to fee-based students. And so finding financial resources has been a huge struggle for students coming into that program just because of the limitation of the type of program. There is the one supplemental tuition scholarship that we definitely submit students for every year. But I'm just wondering, when you're talking to prospective students or with GOMAP in general, like what kind of advice do you give to students who have those limited options for funding their graduate education?
Can speak to this. Yeah, this comes up quite a bit. I'm in the College of Education, and I help with like prospective student days in the College of Ed as well, and we have fee-based programs, and I typically try to let folks know of all their options out there in terms of internal funding sources at UW, and then also external funding sources and even positions at UW that may not cover your tuition, but are high-paying jobs at UW, such as like reader grader positions, and then I usually direct them towards. I'm like blanking on the name now, but there's a place on the UW website of like scholarships, internal scholarships, and then I also point them towards a resource I've used in the past, which is profellow.com. It's just there's just a ton of scholarships out there that GSFIS. There's a ton of scholarships out there for master's students and PhD students, and also like summer opportunities if folks are looking to expand their experience and become whether it's like policy things or summer immersion type of programs. And so I usually direct them towards that, and then also letting them know the difference between these types of programs, because some students actually come in not understanding the complexity of the types of programs and what kind of funding they can get because of their program.
Miguel, your hand is up.
Oh, hi, I've been loving this and resonating with what people say. The last point that was brought up is I was wondering, I'm sure this varies program to program, but do we have a problem in some of the departments with essentially having a master's and PhD tracks where the master's is you have to pay for and the PhD less so, but we are pushing students who may not have as much experience in the traditional ways toward the paid route, even though those are exactly the students who'd be least likely to be able to pay. Do we have structural issues?
I can help with that from a data analysis perspective. Miguel, I would love, I mean, that would be amazing data to get a hold of. We don't have access to the financial information about a student as they're coming in, and we really probably shouldn't ultimately. But there could very well be some questions of that in there about equity as we steer students towards one program or another, where we're ultimately steering somebody who maybe doesn't have the financial means towards an option that also doesn't have the financial support. So I think it's definitely something to think about as we think about equity and inclusion in programs, is how do we do that? How do we do it well? And I think there have been some underlying assumptions maybe in the university that the master's programs that are fee-based or are self-sustaining, the students are paying the tuition dollar for, are ones that are geared towards professional track or geared towards people who are working and have an income large enough to support them, or an employer that's helping support. And I would just say, as university employees, we all know that that's not true for us. And that's more than half of our master's programs. You know, just when we look at where the fee-based programs are, we ourselves can't continue our education with our own tuition remission programs.
Miguel, I agree. Overseeing academic affairs, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but it's certainly true that most of our doctoral programs are kind of legacy programs. They've been around a long time, meaning they've been around since higher education had public funding. And it has just coincided that the loss of public funding for higher education has also coincided with the increase of master's programs and the need to turn toward fee-based programs to kind of keep the lights on. And I think that's a real tragedy of the time that we're living in. I hadn't quite framed it from an equity lens, which I'm embarrassed about now. It's really obvious. So I'm going to start singing that song. I might send some people to you in that, but I think that's a great drum to start beating in terms of how the university looks at, maybe cross subsidies and other things that are a little bit outside of the scope of today's discussion, but I think very relevant to how, I hope that we're all having conversations about how legacy structures lead to inequity and how we have to have policies that undo that. Let's see, I think there is a question in the chat. Patrizia, can you help direct me to that?
Absolutely, I will read it. There's a comment saying, thank you all, this is so very helpful. So appreciate the personal stories and helping us to make connections. Christine, would you mind sharing a reference for your study was the question. And I don't know if Suhanti, apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, if you want to elaborate on that question at all.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. I just thought it would be really helpful to argue for changes. Some of the findings that you are offering, I thought would be really helpful to argue for changes in admissions and recruitment processes. So just to be able to credit you for that work, I thought would be helpful.
When I send the slides over to Raylina and Patricia for sharing, I will add the references to the end, so you have the short list of articles, and that'll take you to a whole bunch more, but I really looked at like what had just been published in the last 9 months as I was doing that work.
Thank you. So, and I actually meant citing your work, citing your study. So maybe the title of the study, or
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, Christine is a person who deserves to be cited and all the wonderful insights she brings to us. I see Deb Alterman's hand next.
Hi. Anyone who knows me knows I can't sit still when we're talking about structural barriers to support for master's students and interdisciplinary students. I'm from the Interdisciplinary Professional Masters in Data Science program. We are really fortunate in that our program attracts a lot of people. There are employers subsidizing tuition like Microsoft, And there are a lot of people for whom the initial tuition to get into the program is insurmountable, even though I was looking at, our students get $35,000 signing bonuses when they step out the door. So this is really a pipeline to compelling jobs. And other programs have different reasons for joining that particular master's program. We are basically doing stuff on our own to try to put away some of our money for scholarships for students. We get 2 GOMAP supplemental funding awards each year, and I am so grateful for that. We've gotten amazing students with them. And that's it. All these other funding sources are truly earmarked for PhD students and not students in professional master's programs or fee-based programs. And that is a university-wide issue. That cannot be solved program by program or moving money around. So I want to bring this up here because we have that broader scale attention, because asking everybody, it's like asking everybody to battle any other form of structural oppression on their own when it needs to start at the top. Someone at the graduate school can start advocating for more equitable funding to get people, when tech companies throw up their hands about their pipeline, that's because students can't even get into the pipeline because of funding. And then the other challenge we face is that as an interdisciplinary program, we are last in line for TAs. Everybody funds TAs or RAs for their own students. And there's, we had a couple students with a lot of hustle. One was a biology TA. We've had a couple of people who TA'd undergraduate computer science classes, but we are last in line. And again, if we're going to say that interdisciplinary education is important, which I believe in my heart that it is, then structurally, the university has to find a way to make funding more equitable for students in those programs. And I will stop my rant now, but I want, individuals and individual programs can't fix this on their own.
Agreed, Deb. Thank you. And that's actually connected to the next question in the chat, which is it Maitreya? Am I saying that correctly?
Yep, you got it.
Are you still here?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Do you want to ask your question? Pose your.
Yeah, sure. So, we always are concerned about how much it costs for our applicants to apply to our program. And this is something that I think is the next, killing the GRE in graduate school for STEM, is getting rid of these application fees. And so I was just wondering, I know that we have a waiver program and I think that's great, but it is a little bit annoying in that students have to apply a week in advance of the final admissions deadline. And also not all students who are financially needy apply for that requirement. So it'd be great if we could lower that cost or get rid of it entirely, but I know that there are some challenges for that. So I just wanted to ask if there's any kind of movement towards that as a goal.
For waiving application fees.
Yeah, or decreasing them.
Mm-hmm. I do not know of such a movement. Relina, do you?
I can tell you that I had to do analysis of our application fee 18 months ago. We are in the middle of our peer institutions. So we're dead center in what we charge. As a state institution, we are slightly hamstrung in what options we can provide to waive application fees. And an additional area that the grad school always has to balance is the application fee is part of what's considered to fund the graduate school as an operation. So for us to even exist, there is an element. So I don't want to say we're not considering it. I know Nicole and I have had conversations about where it would be possible. We've incorporated some things. So I don't want to say that's a non-starter, but there are several things that hamstring us in making those choices. But reassuring all of you too, we're in the middle of fees and we have no intent of increasing that. I've had specific conversations with our financial person and GEMS about that. We have no plans to increase it anytime soon.
Thank you. That's my understanding as well, Christine. I think there's time for one last question, and Anne, you've had your hand up for a while, so let's go to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for convening this gathering. It's so useful, and inspiring, really, to see so many people asking these questions, especially in a moment when a lot of us are overwhelmed with the demands of coronavirus and teaching online and everything else. And that's actually what I wanted to ask about. I run a program in community planning at UW-Tacoma where just the putting together of the program and getting it started sometimes felt like more than anybody could handle. That so kind of like spit and good effort and everything else. And so I'm interested in whether that's not true, but like the work involved, I think, sometimes makes people less willing to ask hard questions about equity and recruitment and retention of students. And so I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how that can be centered more in everything that we do. I'm thinking of the first studio that my grad students did with the city of Tacoma on civic engagement. And the city had just created a line item in their budgeting process where every single unit across the entire city had to justify their equity rationale for any budget ask. So it wasn't something that they could like tack on at the end if they had energy. It was really at the center of and there's pushback about that, and people struggled with it. But I'm wondering if we see a day for that at the university where every single, like whenever we're restructuring or rebuilding, the equity question is at the forefront of every choice that we're making. Maybe that's not enough of a question. It's more,
I mean, I could just jump in there and say, I think that's the goal, Anne, right? That every time we have a restructuring moment, or even a new moment of leadership, that the idea of recreating with equity at the center and not being siloed off into we're doing a DEI moment. And what Christine is modeling out here, you know, in this work in the graduate school is precisely what we're doing in the graduate school. That I didn't bring this project to Christine from my office, you know, that Carolyn didn't bring it from GoMap. This is what Christine was interested in. This is what Christine found, because she knows that equity is really central to looking at issues of data. The data is not neutral, right? We need to understand this. So I think that it can certainly happen in times of creation and recreation. It can happen in times of new leadership, as happened with our new dean, but it can just also happen in a reshifting of priorities. And that's what we're trying to live and model here. You know, and my fellow associate dean Kima here, also not an area that is explicitly data. It is a DEI area, but is very much engaged all the time in questions of DEI.
Well, and I didn't mean to say, I mean, obviously it's the entire goal of the gathering. I think I didn't ask my question well. I'm wondering how it gets storied more effectively across the university, like, and in kind of like making its way out into all of the work that faculty and staff are doing, so that it feels like, yeah, that it like if you have strategies around making it less optional, or I guess that's why I was bringing up the example of like the budgeting thing with the city of Tacoma. And I'm sorry, I didn't frame it well. Like obviously that's exactly what this is, but like just the kind of the harder hooks to kind of drive it into the culture more is what I was wondering about. But I'm sorry if that didn't come across the way that I intended.
No, I might not have heard it right too. I mean, I think that what we hear, you know, modeled out, right? What we hear, the stories of belonging and the fostering belonging that we're hearing from Ariana and Lamar are a part of what you're talking about, right? Having the data piece is a part about what you're talking about. It's about the wraparound nature of understanding the way in which equity has to infuse everything, and that it can't be optional. I mean, that's what I hear you saying as well, is that it can't seem as though people can't say, well, that actually is not a part of my job. That's for those people over there. So I think that it's people having different types of conversations with everybody, from the leadership and from the students, right? And then hitting sometimes that middle piece. Sometimes we see this immovable middle that needs to be worked on a bit. right? And whoever they might be, but understanding that we're all sharing this responsibility together and we're all invested together. And with that, I think we're actually right at time. Thank you so much to our amazing panel today, to Ariana, to Lamar, to Christine, to Kima for moderating. I really appreciate all of you all. Our next session will start after a 15-minute break. It's going to be on graduate student holistic support. So really picking up on a number of different ideas from this panel and really thinking about this retention piece that we need to all be diving into more. So we'll see you back in 15 minutes.